The funeral of Captain Ethan Brooks had just begun when a chilling sound tore through the silence. Zeus, a black-coated German shepherd with eyes as sharp as blades, lunged toward the polished oak coffin, his claws scraping against the wood, producing an ear-piercing screech that left the crowd frozen in shock. Murmurs spread like ripples in water. "What's going on? What's wrong with him?" The soldiers, Ethan's brothers-in-arms who had survived countless battles beside him, stood in stiff formation, their black uniforms pressed, their gazes locked on the scene unfolding before them. The coffin, the place where Ethan was supposedly resting in peace, shook under Zeus's relentless scratching. Zeus wasn't just a companion, he was a warrior, a living shield who had protected Ethan through countless deadly missions. Trained to detect danger, Zeus had once charged through fire, growling to drive back enemies and shielding his handler from unseen threats. But today, he wasn't standing beside Ethan. Today, he was here, at his funeral. And clearly, he refused to accept this reality. Father Michael stepped forward, his deep voice beginning the final prayer. "We entrust the soul of Ethan Brooks to..." Before he could finish, Zeus let out a deep, guttural growl, a sound of raw power that sent a shiver through the crowd. His head was lowered, his fur bristling, and his growl erupted into a furious series of barks, loud and thunderous like rolling storm clouds. Emily Brooks, Ethan's older sister, rushed forward, her face pale, her trembling hands grabbing onto Zeus's collar. "Zeus, stop," she whispered, her voice breaking as she tried to pull the massive dog away. But Zeus didn't listen. His barks grew more desperate, more insistent, his wild eyes burning with urgency. His paws struck the coffin again, his nose pressed against the seam where the lid met the frame, sniffing frantically, as if he sensed something inside that wasn't supposed to be there. Father Michael hesitated, his hands gripping the Bible tightly, his eyes wide with disbelief. The soldiers, the pallbearers in crisp military uniforms, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the howl of a mourning dog. This was the battle cry of a warrior sounding the alarm. "Zeus knows something," Sergeant Jake Russo, a man who had fought alongside Ethan in 3 campaigns, stepped forward, his voice trembling but firm. He clenched his fists, his gaze shifting between the coffin and Zeus. "He's not an ordinary dog. He's trained to detect things we can't see." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "This is my brother's funeral. We can't just open the coffin." But Zeus's barks only grew more desperate, as if he was screaming, "Open it! Now!" Emily's heart pounded. Logic and emotion clashed in a violent storm inside her. Finally, she nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Open it." The pallbearers hesitated, their hands shaking as they positioned tools at the coffin seam. The wood creaked, a long, agonizing sound, as the lid was pried open, inch by inch. The crowd held its breath, leaning forward. Then, when the coffin was fully opened, a collective scream tore through the air. Emily's hands flew to her mouth as a strangled cry escaped her lips. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Inside the coffin was not Ethan Brooks. Not the brother she had loved, not the man with the warm smile and steadfast eyes. It was a stranger. An older man, his face rugged with a thick beard, a long scar running down his left cheek, his eyes closed in a false peace. Chaos erupted. Shouts, gasps, frantic whispers collided into a storm of confusion. "What is this?" Emily sobbed, her voice raw with anguish. "Where's Ethan? Where's my brother?" Sergeant Russo stepped forward, his face pale, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We were told this was Captain Brooks. The military confirmed it. What the hell is going on?" Zeus still barked, circling the coffin, his nose pressed against the wood as if saying, "I told you. This isn't him." Emily dropped to her knees beside Zeus, her fingers trembling as she ran them through his thick fur. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you know, Zeus? What are you trying to tell me?" Father Michael clutched his Bible against his chest, stepping back, his face drained of all color. I have never seen anything like this. We must call the authorities immediately. Russo nodded, pulling out his phone, but his eyes never left the coffin, where the unknown man lay still and silent. If this wasn't Ethan Brooks, then where was he? Was he alive? Taken? Or caught in something far darker than death itself? Zeus lifted his head, his eyes burning with unwavering determination, his teeth bared in a silent vow. He knew the truth. And he would not stop until it was revealed. The shock from the funeral had barely settled, but Emily Brooks refused to accept the military's vague explanation that Ethan had died on a classified mission. The coffin containing a stranger instead of her brother had ignited a fire of suspicion within her. Yet, the one who refused to let go the most was Zeus. The powerful German shepherd, with his muscular frame and burning eyes, grew restless. He no longer sat idly by the coffin. He paced through Emily's home, claws tapping against the wooden floor like a war drum. Every night, Zeus stood by the door, ears perked, eyes locked on the darkness beyond, as if he could hear Ethan's voice calling from the void. Emily watched him, her heart tightening. "You don't believe he's gone, do you, Zeus?" she whispered. The dog responded with a deep, guttural growl, one that carried a message clear as day: "I will find him. Even if I have to tear this world apart." Then, one fateful night, as Emily sat curled up in a chair, eyes red from endless questions with no answers, Zeus suddenly sprang to the door, barking furiously. His thunderous bark shook the window panes, his teeth bared, ready to rip apart an unseen enemy. Emily jolted upright. "Zeus, what is it?" But Zeus didn't wait. He clawed at the door, leaving deep scratches in the wood, then turned to her, his fiery eyes issuing a command: "Follow me." Heart pounding, Emily grabbed her coat and leash. "All right, Zeus. Show me." The moment she opened the door, Zeus bolted into the night, dragging her along. He raced through darkened streets, nose to the ground, ears twitching at every faint noise. Emily ran after him, her breath ragged, unsure where he was leading her, only knowing that he had a purpose. A purpose named Ethan. They stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Zeus stood frozen, body tense, fur bristling like blades. He let out a low, menacing growl, his gaze fixed on the rotting wooden door swing in the wind. Emily shivered. "What is this place, Zeus?" she whispered. The dog didn't answer with words. He answered with action. He lunged forward, slamming his paws against the door, forcing it open with a resounding crash. Emily fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Sergeant Jake Russo. "Jake, meet me at the old warehouse on Pine Street now." Zeus found something. While waiting, she hesitantly followed Zeus inside, her pulse hammering in her ears. The dog led her through piles of debris, sniffing constantly, then stopped at a locked door in the farthest corner. Zeus barked, claws raking against the metal surface. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, are you in there?" Minutes later, Russo arrived with a small unit, weapons drawn. His expression was grim. "If Zeus brought us here, this is big." They breached the door. The beams of their flashlights cut through the darkness. And then they saw him. Ethan Brooks lay on a makeshift cot, eyes closed, his skin deathly pale. Emily screamed, rushing forward, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Ethan! He was breathing, weak, but alive. His eyelids fluttered open, hazy with confusion before recognition dawned. "Emily?" His voice was a broken whisper. Zeus let out a triumphant howl before launching onto the bed, licking Ethan's face relentlessly, his tail wagging furiously. A weak smile tugged at Ethan's lips as his shaky hand reached for Zeus's head. "I knew you'd find me, my brother." But the reunion was brief. Ethan, despite his weakness, struggled to sit up, his expression darkening. I was betrayed, his voice was hoarse. My last mission, someone inside the military wanted me gone. They faked my death. Emily clutched his arm, her tears spilling freely. Who? Who did this? Ethan shook his head. I don't know, but they're powerful. If they find out I'm still alive. Before he could finish, Zeus let out a ferocious snarl, his hackles raised. His gaze locked onto the entrance. Russo whipped out his gun. Something's wrong. They moved fast, getting Ethan into an ambulance. But danger wasn't done hunting them. At the hospital, just when they thought Ethan was safe, a man disguised as a nurse slipped into his room. His face was masked, but his intent was clear. He clutched a syringe, ready to strike. Emily gasped. No! But Zeus was faster than a shadow. With a vicious snarl, he lunged, his body a blur of muscle and fury. He slammed into the attacker, knocking the syringe to the floor. The man struggled, but Zeus pinned him down, teeth inches from his throat, a deep, warning growl shaking the walls. Doctors and security rushed in, tackling the assailant and ripping off his mask. A stranger. Cold eyes. A sneer. You won't escape, he spat before being dragged away. Ethan, still breathless on the hospital bed, locked eyes with Zeus. You saved me again. Emily knelt beside Zeus, wrapping her arms around him. He's not just a dog, Ethan. He's our guardian angel. Russo stepped in, his expression grim. This wasn't random. Someone wants you silenced. Emily's fists clenched. Her eyes burned with resolve. Then we'll find out who. Zeus led us here, and I swear we won't stop. Zeus lifted his head, fangs glinting under the hospital lights, eyes fierce with purpose. Ethan was alive. But the war had just begun. Ethan Brooks was alive, but the price of truth was an unrelenting hunt. In a safe house hidden deep within the forest, known only to Russo and a few loyal soldiers, Ethan, still weak, sat at a wooden table with Emily and Zeus. His gaze was sharp, his grip tight on the gun in his hand. We have to find out who's behind this. They faked my death, locked me in that hole. This isn't just a few traitors. This is an organization. Emily nodded, her fists clenched. They nearly killed you at the hospital. If Zeus hadn't been there. Zeus lay by the door, ears twitching, growling lowly as if responding. He never rested, his eyes burned with fire, muscles taut, ready to charge into the flames for his master. Russo spread a map across the table, his voice tense. I dug up some intel. A secret project, Shadow Protocol. No records, no oversight. They use it to eliminate anyone in their way. Ethan, you were a target because you uncovered something during your last mission that you weren't supposed to see. Ethan frowned, fragmented memories surfacing. I heard them mention Reaper, a leader. If we find him, we can bring them all down. Zeus stood, his fur bristling as if sensing the battle ahead. Emily looked at him, then at Ethan. So what do we do? Ethan gritted his teeth. We infiltrate. Get evidence. End this. The plan was set, a secret military facility storing Shadow Protocol's data. Russo used his connections to pinpoint its location, but it was a fortress, guards, cameras, steel walls. Under the cover of night, they moved in, Zeus leading like a black arrow cutting through the darkness. Ethan, despite his weakness, moved with a soldier's precision, Emily close behind, heart pounding. Russo whispered, cameras are down, but we have 10 minutes. Zeus sniffed the air, guiding them through the maze of hallways, nose to the ground, ears twitching at every sound. They reached the server room, but as soon as Ethan touched the keyboard, alarms blared, red lights flashing. They know we're here," Emily shouted. Guards stormed in, guns drawn. Zeus struck first, snarling like a storm, slamming into the first guard, his teeth clamping down on the man's gun arm, dragging him down. The second guard raised his weapon, but Zeus was faster, leaping and sinking his fangs into the man's shoulder, making him scream and drop his rifle. Inside, Ethan typed furiously. "Got it." He yanked out a USB drive. "Zeus, let's go." They bolted, Zeus leading the way, blood staining his muzzle from those who dared stand in their path. But a shadow blocked their escape, a towering man with a face of steel, gun in hand. "Reaper," Ethan growled, recognizing the voice that had tormented him in captivity. "Shadow Protocol is bigger than you think." "You die here," Reaper sneered, raising his gun. But Zeus moved first. Like a lightning bolt, he lunged, knocking the weapon away. Ethan and Emily tackled Reaper, Ethan's hands tightening around his throat. "It's over," he hissed. Reaper smirked despite gasping for air. "You have no idea what you're up against." With Reaper subdued and the USB drive secured, they escaped, delivering the evidence to the press and trusted officials. Shadow Protocol was exposed, a web of corruption rooted deep within the military, with Reaper as its mastermind. Dozens of operatives were arrested, the project dismantled. Ethan slowly recovered, his wounds healing, though his eyes remained sharp, knowing the cost of truth was paid in blood and fire. Emily embraced him, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We did it." Zeus stood beside them, his fur damp with sweat and blood, yet his eyes burned with victory. Zeus was not just a dog, he was a war god, an unbreakable spirit who had pulled Ethan back from the grave, who had torn through darkness to protect his family. Across the country, his legend spread, the fearless canine who defied all odds. But for Zeus, the only reward that mattered was Ethan's laughter, his hand stroking his head. "Thank you, my friend," Ethan whispered. Zeus let out a low growl, then lay beside him, ever vigilant. The battle was won, but he knew if danger returned, he would rise again, fangs bared, ready to tear apart anyone who dared threaten his own.